What happens when Hollywood's most respected leading man walks into what he thinks is a friendly late-night interview, only to discover he's been set up for public humiliation? Kevin Costner thought he was coming on Jimmy Kimmel Live to promote his latest project, but what unfolded instead was one of the most uncomfortable and explosive confrontations in late-night television history. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and by the end, security had to escort one of America's most beloved actors off the stage. If you want to see how this all went down, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered Kevin's explosive reaction. The evening started like any other taping of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The audience was buzzing with excitement, the band was warming up, and Jimmy was reviewing his notes backstage. Kevin Costner had been booked weeks in advance to discuss his new Western series, and everyone expected it to be a standard promotional interview. Costner had always been known as one of the more gracious and professional guests in Hollywood, someone who could handle any question with charm and wit. But something was different this time. As Costner sat in the green vinyl chair across from Kimmel's desk, there was a noticeable tension in his jaw, a hardness in his eyes that the cameras picked up immediately. Jimmy, sensing something was off but committed to his prepared material, launched into his opening questions with his usual sardonic smile. "So, Kevin, I have to ask about this new show of yours," Jimmy began, leaning back in his chair with that trademark smirk. "Another Western. I mean, at what point do you think you might be, I don't know, beating a dead horse here?" The audience chuckled nervously. It was classic Kimmel, edgy but not necessarily mean-spirited. But Costner's response wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of laughing it off or giving a witty comeback, he sat forward slightly, his hands clasped together, and fixed Jimmy with a stare that could have frozen water. "You know, Jimmy," Costner said, his voice measured but carrying an undertone that made everyone in the studio sit up a little straighter, "I've been making movies since before you were telling jokes to empty comedy clubs. Maybe we should talk about beating dead horses when you've actually created something that people will remember in 20 years. The audience went dead silent. This wasn't the playful back and forth they were used to seeing. Jimmy's smile faltered for just a moment, before he tried to recover with a laugh. "Wow, okay. Somebody's feeling feisty tonight," Jimmy said, glancing toward his desk as if looking for safer ground. "I was just, having some fun. That's what we do here." "Fun," Costner repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "Is that what you call it when you invite someone on your show and then try to make them look foolish for cheap laughs? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels more like amateur hour." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Audience members were exchanging glances, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bit or if they were witnessing something genuinely uncomfortable. Jimmy's writers, visible in the wings, were frantically scribbling notes, trying to figure out how to salvage what was rapidly becoming a disaster. Jimmy attempted to redirect, his voice taking on a slightly more conciliatory tone. "Look, Kevin, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we talk about the show? I hear it's really ambitious, big-budget production." But Costner wasn't interested in taking the olive branch. If anything, he seemed to be just getting started. "You want to talk about ambition, Jimmy? Let's talk about the ambition it takes to spend months in remote locations, working 18-hour days in 100-degree heat, managing hundreds of crew members and a budget that could fund a small country's military, all while trying to tell a story that actually means something. And then you come on a show where the host's biggest accomplishment is reading jokes off cue cards and making fun of people who are actually trying to create something meaningful." The camera operators were having a field day, zooming in on both men's faces, capturing every micro-expression. Costner's weathered features were set in stone, while Jimmy's usual confidence was visibly cracking. The host's hands were now fidgeting with his note cards, and sweat was beginning to form on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning. "Kevin, I think you're taking this way too seriously," Jimmy stammered, his voice losing its usual smooth cadence. "This is supposed to be entertainment, light-hearted conversation." "Light-hearted," Costner said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. "You know what's light-hearted, Jimmy? Making jokes about airline food. What's not light-hearted is bringing someone on your show under false pretenses and then trying to tear them down for sport. You want to know what I think? I think you're intimidated by people who actually have something to say. So you hide behind your little jokes and your safe little studio audience who'll laugh at whatever you tell them to laugh at." The audience was now completely silent, caught between fascination and horror. This was unlike anything they had ever seen on late-night television. Jimmy, clearly out of his depth, made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Okay, let's take a breath here," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Maybe we should go to commercial, give everyone a chance to reset." But Costner was already standing up, his movement deliberate and commanding. The microphone pack clipped to his jacket made a slight rustling sound that seemed deafening in the silence of the studio. "No," Costner said firmly, his voice cutting through Jimmy's suggestion like a blade. "We're not going to commercial. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now, in front of all these people who paid money to see what they thought would be genuine entertainment." The production crew was frozen. The director, visible through the glass booth overlooking the studio, was frantically waving his hands, but nobody seemed to know what to do. This was live television, and there was no script for what was happening. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow and forced. "Kevin, come on. Let's just sit back down and have a normal conversation. This is getting a little intense for a Tuesday night comedy show." "Intense?" Costner's eyebrows raised, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he showed a hint of a smile, though it was far from friendly. "You think this is intense? This is just honesty, Jimmy. Something I'm guessing you're not used to hearing in your little bubble here." The audience was completely captivated now. Some were leaning forward in their seats, others had their phones out despite the no-recording policy, sensing they were witnessing television history in the making. The energy in the room was electric with tension. Jimmy made the mistake of trying to assert some control. "Look, this is my show, and I think maybe you should—" "Your show?" Costner interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "Your show? You mean the show where you read other people's jokes to an audience that's been coached to laugh on cue? The show where you make your living by mocking people who are actually out there creating, building, taking risks? Let me tell you something about shows, Jimmy. A real show is what happens when you put everything on the line, when you risk your own money, your own reputation, when you spend years of your life bringing a vision to reality. That's a show." The camera caught Jimmy's face perfectly. His usual smugness had completely evaporated, replaced by something between anger and panic. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of this kind of verbal assault, especially not on his own stage. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Jimmy shot back, his voice gaining some strength. "I've interviewed presidents, movie stars, musicians. I know how to do my job." "Do you?" Costner asked, taking a step closer to the desk. "Because from where I stand, your job seems to consist of tearing people down for cheap laughs. When's the last time you built someone up, Jimmy? When's the last time you used your platform to actually elevate someone or something meaningful, instead of just looking for the easy punchline?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I promote movies. I promote music," Jimmy finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I give people a platform to talk about their work." "You give people a platform to be humiliated," Costner corrected. "There's a difference. You invite someone here, you research all their personal business, you dig up every embarrassing moment, every failure, every controversy, and then you package it as entertainment. That's not journalism. That's not even comedy. That's just cruelty. With a laugh track. The band members, who had been silent throughout the exchange, were now openly staring. The lead guitarist had actually put down his instrument, completely absorbed in the unfolding drama. Jimmy's face was now flushed red. Whether from embarrassment, anger, or both was unclear, but his composure was completely shattered. "You don't know what you're talking about. I respect my guests. I've had you on before, and it was fine." "Was it?" Costner asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried clearly through the studio's sound system. "Or did I just play along because that's what you're supposed to do? Smile, laugh at the host's jokes, plug your movie, and get out." "Well, I'm done playing along, Jimmy. I'm done pretending that what happens here has any value beyond making you feel important." The audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Several people in the front rows were visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats but unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding before them. Jimmy tried one more time to regain control, standing up from behind his desk. "You know what, Kevin? If you don't want to be here, nobody's forcing you to stay. The door's right there." It was exactly the wrong thing to say. Costner's expression hardened even further, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of decades in Hollywood, of building an empire, of commanding respect on sets around the world. "You think I'm going to slink away like some nobody you can dismiss? You think you can invite Kevin Costner on your show, try to make him look small, and then just wave him away when he doesn't play your game?" He paused, letting the words sink in. "I built my career by standing up to people exactly like you, Jimmy. Studio executives, producers, directors who thought they could push me around because they had a little temporary power. And you know what? I'm still here, and most of them aren't." The security guards stationed near the exits were now alert, clearly receiving instructions through their earpieces. But they seemed uncertain about how to handle a situation involving such a high-profile guest who wasn't actually being violent, just brutally honest. Jimmy's hands were now visibly shaking as he gripped the edge of his desk. "This is crazy. You're being completely unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" Costner laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's unreasonable is a system where people like you get to sit in judgment of people like me. What's unreasonable is that millions of people tune in every night to watch you tear down the very people whose work actually enriches their lives." The studio was now charged with an energy that felt dangerous. You could sense that everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Jimmy's face had gone from red to pale, and beads of sweat were clearly visible on his forehead under the hot studio lights. "You want to know what's really unreasonable?" Costner continued, his voice gaining momentum like a locomotive building steam. "What's unreasonable is that you sit here every night, protected by your writers, your producers, your network executives, taking shots at people who put themselves out there in the real world. You've never risked anything, Jimmy. You've never put your own money on the line, never bet everything on a vision that might fail spectacularly." Jimmy tried to interrupt, his voice cracking. I risk my reputation every night when I go on the air." "Your reputation?" Costner's laugh was sharp and cutting. "What reputation? As the guy who makes fun of celebrities? As the guy who reads jokes other people wrote for him? That's not reputation, Jimmy. That's just brand recognition. There's a difference." The audience was completely transfixed. Several people had their hands over their mouths in shock. Others were leaning so far forward they looked like they might fall out of their seats. The usual laughter and applause that punctuated late-night shows was nowhere to be found, replaced by an almost church-like silence broken only by the two men's voices. "I've been in this business for over 30 years, Costner said, beginning to pace slightly, his movements controlled but predatory. "I've worked with the best directors, the best writers, the best actors in the world. I've seen careers rise and fall. I've seen empires built and destroyed. And you know what I've learned? The people who last, The people who actually matter are the ones who create something real, not the ones who make a living tearing down what others build. Jimmy was now gripping his desk so hard his knuckles had turned white. This is insane. You're completely out of line here. Out of line? Costner stopped pacing and fixed Jimmy with a stare that seemed to burn through him. I'll tell you what's out of line. What's out of line is inviting someone to be your guest and then treating them like they're here for your amusement. What's out of line is building a career on the backs of people who are actually trying to do something meaningful with their lives. The director in the booth was making frantic gestures, but the cameras kept rolling. This was television gold, even if it was destroying Jimmy's reputation in real time. The production assistants looked like deer in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or just let the disaster play out. You know what I think, Jimmy? Costner said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper again. I think you're jealous. I think you look at people like me, people who've actually built something lasting, and it eats at you. Because deep down you know that when you're gone, when your show gets canceled and some other wise guy takes your place, nobody's going to remember Jimmy Kimmel. But they'll still be watching Dances with Wolves. They'll still be watching Field of Dreams. They'll still be watching stories that actually mean something. That hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His face crumpled slightly, and for a moment he looked less like a confident talk show host and more like a man who had just been confronted with some uncomfortable truths about himself. That's not fair, Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Fair? Costner's eyebrows shot up. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair when you bring up someone's divorce on national television for a laugh? Is it fair when you mock someone's career choices or their personal struggles? Is it fair when you take the most vulnerable moments of someone's life and turn them into punchlines? The security guards were now moving closer to the stage, clearly, receiving more urgent instructions through their earpieces, but they still seemed hesitant to actually approach Costner, who commanded the kind of respect that made even trained security professionals think twice. Jimmy made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Look, Kevin, maybe we both said some things we didn't mean. Why don't we start over? Start over? Costner shook his head slowly. Jimmy, this isn't a rehearsal. This isn't a rough draft you can throw away and begin again. This is real life, happening right now, in front of all these people. And the truth is, I meant every word I said. He turned to face the audience directly, his presence commanding even from the side of the stage. You people come here looking for entertainment, for a few laughs after a hard day. I respect that. But what you're getting instead is a steady diet of cynicism and cruelty dressed up as humor. You deserve better than that. The audience was completely silent, absorbing his words. Some nodded slightly as if recognizing something they had felt, but never articulated. Costner turned back to Jimmy, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. And you, Jimmy, you have a platform that millions of people watch every night. You could use that platform to lift people up, to celebrate human achievement, to actually add something positive to the world. Instead, you use it to tear people down for cheap laughs. I don't, Jimmy started, but his voice trailed off. He seemed to have run out of defenses. The saddest part, Costner continued, is that you probably started out wanting to entertain people to make them happy. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that real entertainment comes from celebrating the human spirit, not from mocking it. The studio was now dead silent except for the hum of the cameras and the air conditioning. Even the band members had stopped pretending to look busy and were openly staring at the confrontation. Jimmy tried one more time, his voice weak and defeated. Security, can you please escort Mr. Costner off the stage? But Costner was already walking toward the exit, his stride confident and unhurried. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time. You don't need security to escort me anywhere, Jimmy. I'm leaving on my own terms, just like I've done everything else in my career. He paused, looking directly into the main camera. And to anyone watching this who's thinking about pursuing their dreams, about creating something meaningful, don't let people like this discourage you. The world needs builders, not critics. The world needs people who are willing to risk everything for something they believe in. With that, Kevin Costner walked off the stage of Jimmy Kimmel Live, leaving behind a host whose confidence was shattered, an audience that had witnessed television history, and a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The cameras lingered on Jimmy's stunned face for several long seconds before finally cutting to commercial, but by then, the damage was done. The confrontation had exposed something raw and uncomfortable about the nature of celebrity culture, about the relationship between creators and critics, and about what happens when someone refuses to play by the unwritten rules of Hollywood politeness. It was a moment of brutal honesty in an industry built on carefully managed public relations, and its impact would be felt long after the studio lights dimmed. What do you think really drove Kevin Costner to explode like that? Was it years of frustration with the entertainment industry, or was there something specific that Jimmy said that pushed him over the edge? Subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think was the real trigger behind this legendary confrontation.